2 months of riots in Portland. Federal agents finally sent in to help calm things down. As of yesterday, we're being told that a deal perhaps has been struck with the authorities in Oregon to try to make sure that this now becomes a state and local matter that is handled properly. But we want to get the actual scoop here. So we have Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security Ken Cuccinelli with us now. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So what is the status right now of the agreement that was reported on yesterday? I saw Acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf's statement. It sounds like there's something that has occurred here, but there's a little bit of back and forth between what really is happening to make sure law and order is restored in Portland.
It's really not so much a deal as a partnership. So the state police are finally going to do what we've been asking them to do for weeks in the absence of the Portland police, and that's just come police downtown Portland. And in an effort to achieve peace, protect peaceful protesters, but to get after and quell the violent rioters and the anarchists and so forth that are showing up literally night after night. And throughout July, they've been there for over 60 days, and they've been rioting in Portland every single day. But in July, every day they have targeted the federal courthouse there. That didn't happen in June and May with any regularity. So that was the change in situation over the course of the rioting in Portland. And the mayor and the governor have just laid back and frankly encouraged a lot of these folks who are rioting. And now this week we've reached a point where the governor has agreed to bring in state police, like I said, to do what the Portland police haven't been allowed by their mayor to do and their city council. And we will cooperate in that. What you'll see outside the courthouse is a joint effort between the Federal Protective Service, little-known agency that protects 9,000 or more federal properties, and the state police there right outside the courthouse. But out and around the city and the parks and so forth there, the state police are, frankly, they're already there, is my understanding. I haven't laid eyes on it, but they are already starting to clean up those parks, which have been staging areas for violent crime, directed at the courthouse. And so that's a good thing. This is a true win-win. People in politics, like the governor is doing, always want to claim victory, and the other side just surrendered to me. Well, that isn't what happened here. She finally did what we've been asking her to do for weeks, using her authority. We're glad she's moving in that direction. If we are able to keep the courthouse secure and achieve peace, that is a win-win. That is a classic win for everybody except the violent extremists, and we don't really want them to win. But our officers aren't going anywhere. They're not leaving Portland until it is demonstrated not only that the state police have the ability, which I have no doubt, but the will to deal with the crowd when it becomes violent, as it has every single night for over 2 months in this city.
Can you tell us, and we're speaking to Acting Deputy Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, Ken Cuccinelli. Mr. Secretary, can you tell us, what have the federal agents in Portland, we've seen some news stories about this, but what have they been subjected to? Because there's often this back and forth over whether these are mostly peaceful protests. Should the term protest even be used? What have your federal agents been subjected to?
Probably an easier dividing line is just the clock. So there are protests there every night, peaceful protests. They tend, typically, they had been running till about 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and maybe 75, 100 people. Then they would leave, and a short time thereafter, 1,000 violent rioters would show up. So it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde through the night, except one of them has a whole lot more people showing up for it than the other. And so both are going on, but obviously part of our mission is to protect the ability to peacefully protest and demonstrate. We are entirely supportive of that, as the president has said over and over and over. But as the president has also said, it is the responsibility of government at every level to stop violence. And we have limited federal authority there, and we've stayed within the boundaries of our limits. the limits of our jurisdiction, but that requires partnership. And then what's so unique about Portland is in the whole rest of the country, no matter what sort of political back and forth is going on between, say, the president and the mayor of Chicago, to use one example, or anywhere else, our law enforcement agents continue to work together. We continue to try to achieve peace in those communities. And that's our goal for every American and every American community. That's the president has made it very clear that's what he wants to get after. It seems that some politicians on the left are comfortable with the violence if they see political advantage to it. And that's just not an acceptable approach to performing the most basic function of government, and that is maintaining public safety.
And Mr. Secretary, can you tell us about the possibility of other cooperations like this? Chicago has recently been in the news in headlines discussing whether there's assistance for either Operation Legend or something along those lines to deal with just the surge in violent crime?
Well, first of all, again, the difference between Portland and Chicago and every other really government of every kind around the country is that the law enforcement, federal and state and local, talk everywhere else. The City Council of Portland illegalized communication by the Portland Police Bureau with our law enforcement officers. I mean, that's hard to imagine.
That's unbelievable.
Even if it is unbelievable. So even if they have intelligence, reliable intelligence of a death threat against one of our officers outside that courthouse, they illegalized sharing that information. That has not happened in Chicago. That has not happened anywhere else in the country. And you point to Chicago, and we continue to work together, whether it's our HSI agents working gang cases, whether it's the FBI and the DEA working other cases with the Chicago Police Department. That has all continued on forward throughout this entire time, and without being impeded. And that's the way those professional law enforcement relationships should function. One of the sad changes that we've seen on the left in the last few years is the politicization of policing and of law enforcement. And that is no good for any community. And I would point out that as that takes hold, and you see radical budget cuts of police departments, for instance, in New York, the communities that will suffer the most are the ones that need policing the most. And those are the poorer communities. They're typically they are disproportionately minority communities. That's who gets hurt. And that's not what the president wants to see. He's made it clear to us that we need to do what we can with our resources to try to bring peace and prosperity to these cities, peace so they can have prosperity. And we're ready, willing, and able to cooperate with anyone, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Vegetarian, it doesn't matter. Our goal is maintenance of federal law, and we're happy to assist state and local governments with their responsibilities on the public safety front as well.
You mentioned New York City. Years ago, I worked as part of the NYPD Intelligence Division alongside U.S. Marshals, FBI, DEA, all the different federal agencies involved in the law enforcement piece. And I'm just wondering, I'm not in that game anymore, but I'm wondering if because of the cuts to resources in America's largest city, as well as the spike in violent crime, is there a possibility there'll have to be additional federal law enforcement assets deployed to New York to help?
Well, as you know, New York is highly unusual in the area you work, the intelligence apparatus. They have offices all over the world, and they have been, they frankly have built a very adept intelligence capability, and the purpose of it is to keep New York and, of course, others of us in America benefit safe. And that has been successful. I don't see how you can maintain that at that level with a 25% budget cut. I just don't see that happening. And as you note, violent crime is spiky in New York. It's not going down. And the idea that withdrawing police, responsible policing, somehow will get criminals to sympathetically stop victimizing people in their own communities, because that's who criminals victimize. And when you look at I'm a criminal justice reform advocate. I was helping the president get his criminal justice reform bill, and one of the statistics I like to point out to people is, people are treating criminals like they're victims. Let's talk about the crime victims. If you have a black crime victim in front of you, the odds are that the criminal who victimized that person is black. If you have a white crime victim in front of you, the odds are, statistically, that the criminal that victimized that white crime victim is white, and so on through the races, Hispanic, Asian, you fill it in. That's the way it works, and a big part of the reason it works that way statistically is because of that criminals victimize people who live near them. It's their own communities. So when we draw down policing in these communities, we empower the criminals at the expense of the law-abiding. And it's cruel, frankly.
Before I let you go, Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to ask, there was a question posed somewhat rhetorically by the Attorney General Bill Barr recently on Capitol Hill, where he effectively turned to Democrats in the room and said, aren't you opposed, I'm paraphrasing, but aren't you opposed to riots too? Are there Democrat members of Congress who are reaching out to or working with DHS to express their outrage at this? I mean, is that happening? We're just not hearing it?
I'm not aware of any. I am aware of some who have entered into conversations with us where they thought the narrative was fact, and we lay out the facts, and they leave thinking, oh. And yet, sadly, many of those committee chairmen, ranking members, have then promptly turned around with full knowledge of the facts and promptly just continued to spew the false narrative. So, that's not an encouraging part of our governmental system. Is that a gentle way to put that? But that's what's going on. That's what's going on. And you hear virtually, as the Attorney General pointed out, by implication, you see virtually no condemnation of the violence and a downplaying of the pure volume. The last time I looked, we've had 245 injuries to our federal officers in Portland, to the 4 injuries to protesters of which I am aware. And I'm characterizing them as protesters. I'm not sure if the ones who got injured were protesters or criminals. I also know that 2 weeks ago, I think it was the marshals, seized an individual who'd been attacking law enforcement officers right in front of them. So there was no question about who it was. He promptly went into a seizure. And so his life was at risk. And it was the CBP Borstar medics that came swooping in. Others of our officers had to clear the crowd. They had to clear space because now they couldn't move them. And they worked through a series of medical options before they finally resolved the situation with Naxalone and with an injection, and keeping this person who seconds before had been assaulting federal officers safe. That's the quality of our officers out there. And that is the great attitude they bring to the job, and America's lucky to have them.
Acting Deputy Secretary Ken Cuccinelli of the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Secretary, really appreciate your time, sir, and please come back soon.
Glad to do it. Thank you.
And I really am interested on this hydroxychloroquine. I'm interested to ask Jonathan Lemire, as he's in the press room and as he's working his sources and his news agency is working sources. I'm assuming there's investigative types out there following the money on hydroxy, because it's the only thing that makes sense. Does Putin have a stake in hydroxy? Is the Deutsche Bank backing hydroxy?
Senator Claire McCaskill saying some really stupid stuff on TV, but that's not anything new for Democrats when you're discussing whether it's hydroxychloroquine or anything else around COVID, or really just anything these days. There's no limit to the amount of dumb that they're willing to put out there. I would say this on her claim about hydroxychloroquine as a monetary play for anybody. It's a drug that's been around for 60 years. It would be like saying acetaminophen which is what Tylenol is, for example, the best known brand name of it. But acetaminophen or ibuprofen, someone's an investor in that, and they're just trying to get rich, so they tell you to take it for headaches. Doesn't get any dumber than that. No one's going to get rich from hydroxychloroquine. It's not going to happen. All right, it's off patent. There are multiple large companies, the pharmaceutical companies that make it. Other companies can make it. There's absolutely, so people say that just because they're ignorant and they don't think through anything before they spew out nonsense. But in case you're wondering how much more insane the discussions about all this are going to get. Oh, wait. First, we've got the Fauci. The Fauci is here to talk about hydroxychloroquine. At least the people who are out there saying the things about it. Play clip 12, the Fauci.
I'm very explicit and unambiguous when we say we've got to follow the science. If a study that's a good study comes out and shows efficacy and safety for hydroxychloroquine or any other drug that we do, if you do it in the right way, you accept the scientific data. But right now, today, the cumulative scientific data that has been put together and done over a number of different studies has shown no efficacy. So when there's a video out there for a bunch of people spouting something that isn't true, the only recourse you have is to be very, very clear in presenting the scientific data that essentially contradicts that.
There are contradictory studies right now. Now, the weight of evidence from the studies so far is against hydroxychloroquine. But let's also remember, folks, there's nothing else that people can take that's similar to it. There's no other option out there for any kind of hope at a pharmaceutical that will. I mean, there's remdesivir, but that's an injection, and that's only for extreme cases. This is supposed to be the use case for hydroxychloroquine is where there's a debate right now still. All right, if you're very sick in the hospital, hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin plus zinc does not seem to do very much for you. That has been established from the studies. If you have come down with symptoms and you take that combination within 24 hours, there are plenty of doctors out there who say that they believe that this helped. The downside from the drug is minimal. Downside is very small. So in that kind of environment, you have to ask, why is there this demonization of this as a compassionate use case, really? You want people to be able to take this as, you take malaria prophylaxis with hydroxychloroquine, meaning you might not even ever go outside where there are any mosquitoes. But in certain countries, it's too risky to not take an anti-malarial, and so people will take it anyway. I took anti-malarials prophylactically when I was in when I was in the CIA, and you're doing this because it's not that dangerous for you, and it's way worse to get the malaria parasites. So I just think that the Fauci, he's not being honest about what we don't know. He is correct that the preponderance of evidence right now is against late-stage intervention hydroxychloroquine. What about early stage, which is what the proponents have been saying all along? There is not a study yet that I have seen that addresses that. If I'm wrong, I'll come on the air and say it. Haven't seen it yet. I still can't believe we're being evicted from our home that we didn't sell. That's what Deborah said when she found out that she was the victim of home title theft, which is a crime that can actually cost you your home. Here's how it works. The bad guys find your information online, and then they forge your signature stating that you sold your home to them. Then you don't find out about this until either you get an eviction notice or you can get bills in the mail based on money that you never borrowed. Home title theft is an increasing crime, especially while everyone's at home on lockdown. You've got to take the precautions necessary to defend yourself. Go to HomeTitleLock.com. They're the only people I trust to put a virtual barrier online around your home's title. Go to HomeTitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim and don't even know it. Use code BUCK and you'll get 30 free days of protection. Only, though, if you go to HomeTitleLock.com. Again, that's HomeTitleLock.com. Oh, man, Producer Mark, we were so close today. We were like minutes away from getting our interview with the vice president. And then there was a bus accident. What are the chances? Anyway, it's that's obviously frustrating. No one was hurt. Everyone's fine. It just meant they had to switch out of the bus caravan. The vice president was in Pennsylvania today, at a cops for Trump rally, and there was some kind of an issue, an accident with the bus, or I think the bus might have broken down. Anyway, some kind of issue with the bus that the vice president was traveling on, and so at the very last minute they had to switch, and then because of that change, so I'm so sorry. They are telling us we will reschedule for tomorrow, most likely. But we were sitting here waiting for our vice president interview, and sure enough, we will hopefully get it. Hopefully get it tomorrow, if not, maybe next week. But that's the breaks. That's the thing when you're doing media stuff. You gotta sometimes just roll the dice and see how things go. Anyway, let's talk about one of the big challenges that I see for the Republicans here with this election, and it has to do with beating Santa Claus. Now, I don't mean physically striking St. Nick as he is dressed up in his red attire trying to come through your chimney. I mean defeating the concept of the people that give you the free stuff. It's always a very big challenge that Republicans have to deal with, because Democrats, Republicans want to give some free stuff too. Republicans, there's a lot of corporate welfare, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and Republicans are not entirely opposed to the welfare state. And so let's understand, it's who wants to give more free stuff. That becomes the challenge, and the GOP is always going to lose when it comes to this, right? They're never going to be in a position to out free stuff the Democrats, and that's why this impasse that currently exists over the next COVID relief bill is just, it's always fraught with politics, very obvious thing to say, but even more so than usual. This one is about the Democrats saying, we just want to give you more free stuff. It's those big, bad, mean Republicans who are saying, go back to work. A lot of people are probably getting used to being at home. You're collecting state unemployment plus the federal $600 a week. That's up to $600 a week. That's some, or is it $600 a month? What is it? I think I just got confused for a second. Whatever, it's a lot of money. I think it's $600 a week. Right? Yeah, it's $600 a week. That's a lot of money. So, yeah, that's one of the big fights that's underway. But how can you deal with the Democrats who are going to constantly make a better offer with the taxpayer dollars? Right? How do they do that? It's not going to be an easy thing. It's not going to work out very well. Yeah. Automatically add $600 to each week of benefits you're eligible to receive. That's meaningful. That's real money, right? For anybody. $600 a week is money to me. Mitch McConnell is trying to say, look, we got to not pay people more to stay home. Well, we'll see how this works out. Play clip 7.
It's the script from police reform all over again. Weeks of talk from Democrats about the urgency of the issue. Weeks of Democrats thundering that people will be hurt if we don't act. But then when it's time to actually make a law, Democrats would rather keep political issues alive than find a bipartisan way to resolve them. Take the issue of additional federal unemployment insurance. For weeks now, it's been clear to a majority of Americans that we should not pay people more to stay home than we pay people who continue working. Should we have generous unemployment insurance in this crisis? Of course. Republicans want to continue the federal supplement at 8 times the level Democrats themselves put in place during the last recession. But obviously, we should not be taxing the essential workers who kept working so the government can pay their neighbors a higher salary to stay home.
That's completely reasonable. Everything he's saying there, you got to say, okay, yeah, if we're going to pay people more to stay home than to go to work, we're going to have an issue here, or we're going to have a problem. Everything he says there is completely reasonable, and yet, how are the Democrats going to play this? How are they going to frame this issue? Well, of course, what they're going to do is say that Republicans, of course, mishandled this, and that Trump is the reason, Trump is responsible for all the death from this. But beyond that, they will claim, Democrats will claim that Republicans are unwilling to help people in need the way that they want to. And look, this is the Democrats want to send you checks to stay home so you don't go back to work, and have you, speaking of using the mail, not just sending checks, want you to send in your vote via the mail. Now, I've got to tell you, this is a tricky area. It's a tricky area. Not that it's not tricky in terms of whether you can find out if there's going to be fraud or anything else. Oh, no, I don't mean that. I mean, Democrats are going to hammer this issue like nothing else, because the same way they feel like if they can get amnesty, nothing else really matters. If they get amnesty, they win on everything. That's kind of their idea. That's their plan. They think that with this election, if they can get mail-in voting, it's all over. It's all over. And I think we all understand that. For one, I'm worried about the fraud component. I also think that there's an issue with you. You should be willing to show up and vote in person if you're going to vote. There is a process here. I think that is an acceptable, that is allowable, right? We always hear from the left, look at the Second Amendment. Oh, there's all kinds of onerous restrictions on your right to bear arms. They say, oh, well, that's just fair. Having some structure in place for voting, where you have to go and cast a vote, is a good thing. Now, this is where they come back and they will say, oh, but what about absentee voting, which I voted absentee. I was in Iraq in 2009, so I had to vote. I voted absentee that year. And, it's just the way it is. And I wasn't military, but a lot of military folks end up voting absentee. Well, that's supposed to be because you have a credible reason that prevents you from voting in person. And the absentee ballot issue is minimized. It's a smaller arena for fraud because it's a smaller portion of the overall vote. Right? If 5% of ballots or 10% of ballots are going to be absentee in a particular race, sent in via the mail, that's a much lesser opening for fraud than if you have 100% of it all coming in through the mail. So President Trump said just earlier today, with universal mail-in voting, not absentee voting, which is good, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote? Question mark? Question mark? Question mark? All right. That is not a good idea. I know. I understand that people are, they're going to say, hold on a second, Buck. Come on. Trump has a good idea here. No, I think that that's not something that the president really, here's what he's doing. And you're all going to send me an email about this, but you're going to say, well, Buck, he's just raising this now to get more attention for the issue and everything else. Okay, I mean, that might be true, and Trump certainly has an understanding of how to get attention for things. That's one thing he definitely knows. The Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has also weighed in on this. Earlier today, he responded when asked during a congressional hearing about Trump's tweet, quote, "I'm not going to enter a legal judgment on the fly this morning." That's what he said about this. In the end, the DOJ and others will make that legal determination. So legal analysts say the occupant of the Oval Office does not have the authority to delay the election, and Kaine pointed out Thursday that Congress can change the date of the election, but the Constitution stipulates the president's term ends in January. So Pompeo also said, we want to have an election that everyone is confident in. And he declined to answer the explicit question about postponing the election. Libs are going to completely freak out about this. Now, maybe that in the end is a good thing, in that keeping them off balance is helpful for this political cycle. But I've got to tell you that for me, this is going to feed into so much ferocity on the left. It helps their turnout. They're all going to say, see, I told you, Trump's going to cancel the election. You're going to have a whole cycle now of Trump's going to cancel the election. And it's just, look, it's not going to happen. It's not true. He won't cancel the election. He's not going to postpone the election. But now we got to spend an entire news cycle on that. Oh my gosh, they're all going to. We already have members of Congress, Democrat members of Congress, saying Trump won't leave office if he loses. Now they're going to be saying, see, he told us. Not even going to have it. He's a dictator. He's a fascist. Oh. So, yeah, I think he's probably trolling them, but trolling at what cost? He did also say, though, that this was another tweet. Mail-in voting is already proving to be a catastrophic disaster. Even testing areas are way off. The Dems talk of foreign influence in voting, but they know that mail-in voting is an easy way for foreign countries to enter the race. Even beyond that, there's no accurate count. I mean, it is wide open for all kinds of shenanigans. And if you allow this kind of change in the election process, let's remember, even if Democrats, get ready for this, even if Democrats demand mail-in voting and get it, they will turn around if they lose the election with mail-in voting and say that this was illegitimate because look at all the mail-in voting cheating that happened. Guaranteed. The fact that they would have gotten their way will not prevent them from saying that this was a stolen election. You can just bet on it right now. I'm telling you, that's what's going to happen. Trump was really, he is all fired up about this. He also tweeted out, this is all today, New York mail-in voting is in a disastrous state of condition. Votes from many weeks ago are missing, a total mess. They have no idea what is going on. Rigged election. I told you so. Same thing would happen, but on a massive scale with USA. Fake news refuses to report. Well, it is true. The fake news does refuse to report on this. They don't want to talk about the problems with mail-in voting. Once again, Democrats want the minimum amount of safety precautions in place for a free and fair election and want to exaggerate the need for safety precautions. I mean, why can't we just vote socially distanced, right? People stand 6 feet apart in line. Well, why can't we do that? Wear a mask, 6 feet apart. Boom. They tell us this is fine for everything else. You still have grocery workers going to the grocery stores. Still have truckers listening to the show, getting us our food and our goods all across the country, keeping things going. Medical personnel, cops, first responders, fire department. Not teachers, though. Oh, no, not. If you're a good conservative, patriotic teacher listening to this, I'm sorry the teachers' unions, represent you so poorly. Well, maybe they get you more money, but they represent the political interests of this country so poorly. So there you have it. They really want mail-in voting because they think that it will benefit them. It has nothing. There is very little threat of the virus from mail-in voting. They already did. They've already done this in other states. They've had voting in other states where it was in person. It's absurd. But if you think the Democrats are above any hysteria, any kind of plot or shenanigans to take this election away from Donald Trump, I don't think you've been paying attention for the last few years. They lied about this guy saying he was a Russian asset for years. You think they're going to stop on this? I don't think so. Delusional is a word that I often use to describe the Democrats, the left. I really do think that they have. Look, the mass movements of delusion are not unusual, or not. I shouldn't say unusual. They're not unprecedented in history. I mean, you look at the Soviets. They thought they were going to bring about a workers' paradise, and they ignored famine, they ignored repression, they ignored all these things, and then that was just what they were living with for decades. Right? So people will get into this. You look at communist China. The political movements of the past have often been rooted in core delusions and people who have an obtuse sense of reality or a disconnect from reality. Well, you see this with, for example, the way that Democrats in the aftermath of their assault on Attorney General Barr, the way that they have just completely misrepresented what happened and been utterly insane. Here you have them complaining about what happened here, complaining about the Attorney General. Producer Mark, play the clip.
What does holding him accountable look like, though? Are there any actual consequences?
We have many options for consequences. What I want people to know is we actually have to hold him accountable to the American people. You saw his affect yesterday. He was disrespectful, spoke over top of every one of us. In particular, he spoke over women. He was flanked by at least 10 staffers, not a person of color among them. And he couldn't identify that we have systemic racism in this country. Maybe that's because he's living in a bubble. I just have to tell you, it was so disrespectful. The way he approached Congress, the way he approached our committee, his willingness to say one thing and in a single statement flip his own answer. He did that with me. When I said, do you believe it's ever appropriate to use pepper balls against protesters? He said, no. And then he wanted to flip back and he said, well, wait a second. Well, rioters, yes. He could not keep a straight answer.
No, I think that's a very straight answer. Rioters are different than protesters. But apart from that, which is not a distinction that any intelligent person would have difficulty with, they shouted over him constantly. I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time. They ask him questions and don't let him answer. They make speeches, pretend at the end that there's an interrogative pause, and then I reclaim my time. I reclaim my time. Democrats are insane. Totally nuts. Totally out of it. But if we don't watch it, they're going to be in charge coming up real soon, folks.